There's a bottle on my desk. It's the original Restoril bottle from January 2022. 30 tablets, 30 milligrams each. The orange plastic is faded now. The label reads, Dr. Anjali Mehta, Dr. Franklin Merritt. Take as directed, discard unused portions. I never discarded it. I've been empty for 4 years and 3 months, and every morning I sit down at this desk to work on a book I haven't been able to write for 7 months, and the bottle is there. I couldn't tell you exactly why I keep it. I suppose I tell myself it's a reminder. But I've been telling myself that for a while now, and I'm no longer convinced reminders do anything except confirm that the thing you're trying to remember already happened. It's 2:47 in the morning. It is always 2:47 in the morning. That's not a figure of speech. My eyes open, I look at the ceiling, and the clock reads 2:47. Every night. It's been this way for 2 years. My body learned a new normal during those 14 years. And what it learned is that 2:47 a.m. is when the prescription would have run out if I'd taken everything as written. 4 years clean, and my nervous system still follows the original schedule. The home study is quiet. Gambier is a small town in Knox County, Ohio. 4,000 people, 164 years old, built around a liberal arts college that gave 36 years of my life what I thought was its highest purpose. The Kenyon College campus is 400 meters from my front door. If I sit at my desk and look through that window, I can see the limestone tower of Bexley Hall lit by institutional floodlights. At 3 in the morning, it looks almost beautiful. At 3 in the morning, almost anything does, when the alternative is the inside of your own head. My name is Franklin Boyd Merritt. I was professor of American history at Kenyon College from 1982 until March of 2018. 4 books, 2 presses, Princeton and Yale. The Ohioana Book Award in 2001 for The Quiet Majority, Midwestern Descent, 1945 to 1975. 47 master's theses I advised to completion. 3 consecutive years, 1999, 2000, 2001, named Best Professor in the graduating class yearbook. They voted. 312 students each time. I know those numbers. I've known them since the plaques went up in the history department corridor in Ascension Hall. I know them still, though I haven't been in that corridor in 6 years. I know a lot of numbers. A Kenyon salary in 2006 was $140,000 a year. 14 milligrams is the standard starting dose of Temazepam. 15 milligrams is what Dr. Carl Orman wrote on the pad in his office in Mount Vernon. 60 milligrams is what I was taking each night by 2014. 60 milligrams of a drug whose recommended maximum is 30, prescribed for no more than 2 weeks per every clinical guideline ever written. I was on it for 14 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Let me tell you about the margins. I spent 36 years teaching students to read the margins, not the main text. Anyone can read the main text. The main text is what the author wanted you to see. The margins are where the real argument lives. The deletion in the second galley. The penciled note that survived the editorial pass. The footnote that contains the thesis the author wasn't brave enough to put in the body. I used to tell my History 101 students on the first day, the main text is the press release. The margins are the document itself. A historian lives in the margins. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it professionally, practically, physically. 40 years of reading primary sources, and every page I ever marked was a conversation between my understanding and someone else's. I read in 3 colors: black ink for fact, red for argument, green for what I wasn't sure about yet but couldn't let go. My annotated copies of sources were, I've been told, more valuable as teaching objects than the sources themselves. Graduate students used to ask to borrow my copies of de Tocqueville, of Hofstadter, of C. Van Woodward, just to see the margins. Restoril didn't erase my text, it erased my margins. Not overnight, not in any way that was obvious or clean. That would have been easier to name. What it did was slower, a kind of progressive narrowing, like fog that comes in from the edges of a photograph while the center stays clear. You're still reading. You still see the main text. You can still cite the date of the Compromise of 1850, still recall the difference between Whig and nativist interpretations of Jacksonian democracy. The facts stay. The facts are always the last to go. What goes first is the space between the facts, the ability to inhabit knowledge, to hear your own margins. September 2006. I was 51 years old. The fourth book, The Architecture of Forgetting, Civil Memory and the Vietnam Era, 1975 to 2001, was due to Yale University Press in 48 hours. I was in room 714 at the New Haven Hotel on Chapel Street, 1.3 kilometers from the Yale campus. It was 11:47 at night. The manuscript was on the desk, 712 pages, printed and bound with rubber bands, and I had read it 4 times that day, and I could not feel confident about a single paragraph. That is not entirely true. What I mean is, I could not tell anymore whether what I was reading was good or whether the 3 weeks without proper sleep had made me incapable of knowing the difference. There's a version of exhaustion that doesn't feel like tiredness. It feels like watching yourself from a short distance, like being slightly outside your own judgment. I'd been sitting in that chair since 7 in the morning, and I had not slept more than 2 hours a night for 22 days. The insomnia had started 2 weeks before the hotel, back in Gambier. It was tied, I told myself, to the tenure case. Dr. Helen Park, she was 37. I had been her dissertation advisor and then her faculty mentor for 4 years. When her tenure case came to committee, Kenyon's history department, spring 2006, I was the senior member present. Her work was strong. Her publication record for the current market was adequate but not exceptional. I argued for her. I want to be precise about that. I argued for her clearly and at length in closed session. The committee voted against. Helen Park sent an email to the full department on a Wednesday morning. 16 people received it. It said, in part, that my advocacy had been performative rather than substantive, and that I had privately indicated to her that the outcome was predetermined. I had not. What I had said during a mentorship conversation 6 weeks earlier was that tenure at small liberal arts colleges was, I use these words exactly, not a process you can control. She took that as a warning. She may have been right that it was, and that I didn't know I was giving one. I don't know anymore. I have thought about it in the margins of many sleepless nights over the past 18 years, and I still don't know. What I know is that after her email, I could not sleep. 2 weeks of not sleeping. Not insomnia in the gradual, partial sense that most adults mean. I mean the absence of sleep. 2 to 3 hours, hypnic jerk awake, ceiling, gray ceiling, old house sounds, the particular silence of Gambier that is not silence, it's the absence of traffic, and the brain just running. Running without purpose, reviewing the Helen Park decision, reviewing my argument, reviewing the committee faces, reviewing what I'd said in the mentorship meeting, reviewing. I finished the manuscript in the hotel room at 2:15 in the morning, submitted the final files electronically at 2:43, and lay down on the hotel bed in my clothes. I did not sleep. At 8 the following morning, I called Carl Orman, Dr. Carl Orman, 61 years old, general practitioner, Mount Vernon, Ohio, 12 miles from Gambier. He had been my physician for 11 years. I told him I hadn't slept in 3 weeks. He told me to come in that afternoon. The appointment was 22 minutes. He asked about my stress levels, my caffeine intake, my exercise habits. He said, "You're an academic in the middle of a book launch. This is situational insomnia, completely normal." He said, "Let me give you something to get through the next 2 weeks." He wrote 15 milligrams of Restoril on his prescription pad. He said, "Take 1 hour before bed, no more than 2 weeks. It'll reset your sleep cycle." I said, "How long can I use this?" He said, 2 weeks is the standard. It's perfectly safe for that window. It's perfectly safe. Those 3 words. I've heard them in my sleep too, though not the way I'd like to, which would be as a warning, as a kind of retroactive alarm. They arrive the way they arrived then, reassuring, professional, ordinary. The words of a man who had been practicing medicine for 30 years and was treating what looked, from the outside, like a tired professor with a book deadline. I went to the pharmacy on Delaware Street, filled the prescription, took 1 tablet with a glass of water at 10 p.m. that evening, lay down in the bedroom. I slept for 9 hours. The relief of it. If you have never been without sleep for 3 weeks, I can't adequately convey what 9 hours means. It isn't pleasure exactly. It's more like the restoration of a baseline you didn't know you needed until it was gone. I woke up and I could hear the birds outside. I could smell the coffee Sylvia had made downstairs. I was, in some way I hadn't been for 22 days, myself. I took the 2nd tablet the following night, and the night after that. The 2-week prescription lasted 22 days because I took half a tablet the 3rd night to see if that was enough. It wasn't, and then a full tablet for the remaining weeks, and at the end of it I had 3 tablets left, and I didn't take them, and I waited. I waited 8 days. The 8th night I was awake until 3:40 a.m. The Helen Park situation had moved into a different part of my skull, a deeper part, quieter but constant. And at 3:40 a.m. I took the last 3 tablets over the next 3 nights and called Carl Orman's office in the morning. He renewed the prescription without an appointment. His nurse called it in. 30 tablets, 15 milligrams. I picked it up on a Tuesday. I want you to understand, I did not feel that this was a significant event. I was not sneaking. I was not hiding. There was no alarm. There was no moment of recognition. There was just the simple arithmetic of, without the tablets, I do not sleep. With the tablets, I function. Therefore, I should take the tablets. That arithmetic is how it starts. That is how it always starts. The tolerance built in what I now recognize as a classical pattern, though at the time I had no framework for recognizing it as a pattern at all. By the spring of 2007, 7 months in, 15 milligrams was giving me 5 hours of sleep instead of 8. I went back to Carl. He said we could try 20 milligrams. He didn't seem concerned. I didn't seem like an addict because I wasn't an addict. I was a respected professor with published books and a spotless professional record who had trouble sleeping. By 2009, I was at 30 milligrams nightly. Carl Orman retired in 2012. I transferred my records to Dr. Sarah Welling in Columbus. She was 43, internal medicine, offices on High Street. I gave her my history. She said, 30 milligrams is high normal, but within range for your age group. She did not know about the escalation. I did not volunteer the escalation. She began prescribing 30 milligrams per month without discussion. I discovered PlushCare, a telemedicine service, in late 2016. Online consultations, 8 minutes, prescriptions sent to your pharmacy. I told them about difficulty sleeping. They prescribed 15 milligrams. The consultations cost $42. I had 3 prescriptions running simultaneously by the end of 2016. Carl Orman's renewals still occasionally processed through his former practice. Sarah Welling in Columbus, PlushCare, 60 milligrams per night. The Ohio Automated RX Reporting System, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, should theoretically have flagged this. Theoretically. But the PDMP data sharing between telemedicine platforms and in-state general practitioners was in 2016 incomplete. And I was not a young man with a criminal history buying opioids. I was a 62-year-old professor with a Yale University Press book on his shelf. No one was looking for me. Here is what I knew about benzodiazepines by 2010. I knew they had a reputation for dependence. I had read about it, vaguely the way academics read about things outside their field. Enough to acknowledge the existence of the literature, not enough to have examined it with rigor. I had associated that dependence with a kind of weakness I believed I was not susceptible to. I was, after all, a person of considerable discipline. I had written 4 books. Discipline was a category I inhabited. This is the part that embarrasses me most. Not the 60 milligrams, not the 3 simultaneous prescriptions. What embarrasses me most is that I was a man whose professional life was built entirely on the idea that the unexamined assumption is the most dangerous kind, that the most lethal errors in historical interpretation come from believing you already know what you're looking at. I taught that principle to students for 36 years. I failed to apply it once to myself. The first thing I lost was the ability to read. Not the mechanical act, I could still move my eyes across a page. What I lost was depth, the capacity to reach into a text and pull out what wasn't immediately visible. I first noticed it in the fall of 2009. I was preparing lectures for my American Political Thought seminar, a senior seminar I'd been teaching for 20 years. I was rereading Richard Hofstadter's Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, a book I'd read 4 times in my career, a book whose architecture I knew the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in. I read 30 pages and understood the main text perfectly. I could have summarized it. I could have cited it, but I couldn't get past the surface. The marginal ideas, the implications that ripple out from the argument and relate it to the rest of historiography weren't coming. I told myself I was tired. It was October. October is always hectic. I printed the relevant chapters out with wider margins and made notes. This was new. I had never needed notes to remember what I was thinking while I read. I held my ideas in my head between sessions. Now I needed the notes because without them, when I returned to the page, I couldn't remember what I'd been building. A historian who can't hold an argument between sessions is a very specific kind of diminished. But there is always an explanation. There is always October. There is always the fatigue of late middle age. There is always something more specific and more plausible than the thing that's actually happening. In the fall of 2014, 2 students filed formal complaints with the department. Not complaints of misconduct, not accusations of anything that would appear in a personnel file. The complaints described that I had, in 2 separate class sessions, repeated the same paragraph of lecture material twice without appearing to notice. One of the students had written, "Professor Merritt seemed confused about where he was in the lecture. It happened twice in the same class." The department chair called me in for an informal check-in. How was I sleeping? How was the health? Was there anything in my circumstances she should be aware of? I told her I was fine. I told her I was working on the 5th book and the schedule was demanding. She was diplomatic. She asked if I had considered seeing a physician about the fatigue. I was seeing 3. None of them knew about the other 2. The moment I understood that I had lost the ability to know whether I understood. This is the hardest part to describe. I was sitting in the home study on the night of March 11th, 2015. It was 3:12 in the morning. I had come downstairs at some point during the night. I didn't remember walking down, but I was in the chair, so I must have. There was a glass of scotch on the table to my left that I also didn't remember pouring. There was a Restoril tablet in the palm of my open right hand. Sylvia was standing in the doorway. We looked at each other for a long time. She was wearing the blue bathrobe she's had since 1998, the one with the torn left pocket she keeps meaning to sew. Her expression was not anger. It was not fear. It was something quieter and worse. The kind of look a person gives when they've been waiting for a conversation for a long time and they've finally accepted it isn't coming. She didn't say anything. She went back upstairs. I sat in the chair until the sun came up, looking at the tablet in my hand. I did not take it. I did not put it back. I just looked at it. And I thought, I don't know when I came downstairs. I don't know when I poured the scotch. I don't know how long I've been sitting here. And none of those things are supposed to be unknowable. Those are facts about the last 6 hours of my own life, and I cannot locate them. A historian who cannot locate himself in time. I thought it, I sat with it, and then, because this is what the body does, I put the tablet in my mouth and swallowed it dry. The retirement was March 2018. Declan Foster was the college president. 54, Yale Law, the kind of institutional administrator who is very good at making difficult conversations feel like collegial consultations. He called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. His assistant had left a coffee on the small table between our chairs. He said, "Frank, I want to talk about the future." He said the college valued my contributions. He said that several members of the academic community had expressed concern about my classroom presence, and he wanted to address those concerns proactively. He said there were resources available for faculty considering retirement, and that the transition package for professors with tenure and 30-plus years of service was, and he mentioned a number. I had not been accused of anything. There was no formal process. There was a number on a table and the very clear understanding that if I declined, the next meeting would involve evidence, and the evidence would be worse. I shook Declan Foster's hand. I walked out of Pierce Hall. I walked home. I sat in the home study and looked at my 4 books on the shelf and the manuscript of the 5th that I'd been working on since 2012. I did not cry. I'm not sure if that was dignity or damage. I still can't tell the difference. Sylvia made dinner that night. We ate at 6 p.m. the way we always did. She asked how the meeting went. I said, I'm going to retire in June. She put down her fork. She said, okay, just that, okay. And we ate in a silence that has been, in various forms, the dominant texture of this house ever since. My daughter Clara is 40 years old. She lives in Columbus. She's an architect. She married a wonderful man named Emeka. They have 2 children. Clara flew to Gambier in January of 2019. She sat at the kitchen table and she said, Dad, I know about all 3 doctors. I have no idea how she found out. She had done her research. She had the names, the dosages, the pharmacies. She had printed out the FDA prescribing information for Temazepam and underlined in pencil the paragraph about dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal. She was not angry. She was steady. She said, I'm not here to fight. I'm here because Ben called me and said he was worried, and I'm the one in this family who flies to the conversation. I said, I can stop whenever I need to. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything. She had her mother's expression then, that same quiet that is not silence, that is the holding of something larger than what the room can contain. She said, I know, that's what scares me. I started the taper with Dr. Anjali Mehta that September. Clara had found her, a geriatric specialist in Columbus who specialized in benzodiazepine discontinuation. The taper took 16 months. I will not describe all 16 months in detail because some of it I cannot describe. Some of it is simply gone. Hours and days that did not fully encode, and what is left are fragments. sensory impressions, Sylvia's face at odd angles, the radiator sound, the texture of blankets. The taper was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I spent years living off 3 hours of sleep and writing a book about American memory. January 2022. Dr. Mehta's office on East Broad Street in Columbus. Gray afternoon, a Tuesday. She said, "You're done." She smiled when she said it. She was 41 years old, small, with very steady eyes. She said, "You should be proud." I said thank you and got in the car and drove back to Gambier. I did not feel proud. I felt the way the end of a very long project feels when you've finished it but cannot yet locate what comes after. The project was over, that was true, but the 14 years were also over, and they had contained in them years I am not able to fully retrieve. Ben calls every Sunday, 12 minutes on average. We talk about his work in plant ecology at Reed and the weather in Gambier, and sometimes, briefly, about the grandchildren. He never asks about the Temazepam. He never asks about the retirement. He's a good man and a careful one. He protects both of us from the conversation. Clara calls every other Wednesday. We talk for 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. She asks real questions. I give her real answers when I have them. Sylvia makes dinner every night. She has made dinner every night for 41 years, and for 14 of those years I sat down to that dinner in some state of pharmacological management, and she is still making dinner, and I sit down to it, and sometimes I look at her across the table and I try to find the right words and I cannot find them, and she looks back at me with an expression that suggests she may not need me to find them, or that she has stopped waiting, or that both things are true simultaneously and she has made her peace with the ambiguity. I haven't. I don't know how. The fifth manuscript has 342 pages. I printed it last October. It has post-it tabs in 3 colors and marginal annotations in black ink and some in red and very few in green. The green annotations, the ones for what I wasn't sure about yet but couldn't let go, have become sparser over the past 7 months. I keep sitting down at this desk and I keep looking at the pages, and I know the main text and I can follow the argument. What I cannot access is the layer below, the space between the facts, the level where a historian finds what the facts mean, the margins. I got clean. I didn't get back. Those are 2 very different things, and I'm still trying to understand the distance between them. Sometimes I sit at this desk at 2:47 in the morning and I read what I've written, and I can tell that whoever wrote those 342 pages was in some important way more than who I am now. Not better at the mechanics, more present in the deep structure, more capable of hearing the argument that lives under the argument. The bottle is on the corner of the desk. The limestone tower of Bexley Hall is lit up at 3 in the morning through that window. 400 meters and 36 years from here. Sometimes I open the drawer of the desk and take out the red pen. I hold it. I don't always know what I'm waiting for. I hold it for a few minutes and then I put it back. I suppose I'm still looking for the margins.